It started with a bag, old sun-bleached canvas, leather straps worn soft, a brass buckle dulled by time. It sat on the porch of a quiet white house at the edge of Elm Street, not dropped, not forgotten, but placed, and beside it, still as stone, lay a yellow dog, head down, eyes on the road, waiting. No one in Wilford Hollow could remember when it began. Some said it was a few weeks, others swore it had been months, but everyone noticed the same thing. The dog never left the bag, not once. He stayed through rain, through the storm that knocked out power for 3 streets, through the early frost that turned leaves to ash. He waited like something sacred had been left behind. At first, the neighbors made small talk. That's Buddy, right? From the Greaves place. Probably just waiting for someone to come back. But then the questions grew quieter, heavier. Why would a mailman leave his bag behind? And why has Buddy refused to leave its side? Everyone in town remembered Harold Johansson, the mailman with the kind eyes and perfect memory. He knew your anniversary, your favorite coffee creamer. He gave biscuits to the dogs, hugs to the kids, and a banana wrapped in napkins to Miss Tilda every Tuesday. He was always there, until one day he wasn't. No letter, no goodbye, no last route, only the bag and the dog. Now, every morning at 7:08 sharp, Buddy walks out to the porch, lays beside the bag and waits. Not for food, not for attention, just waits. The town has theories. Retired, moved away, sick, but nobody knows for sure. Only Buddy does, and he isn't saying a word. But if you look close enough, you'll see it in the way he stares down the street, in the soft thump of his tail when a truck passes, in the way the flowers planted long ago seem to lean toward the steps now, like they're waiting to dot. Not every story begins with fireworks or ends in tears. Some begin with a silence so deep, even the wind holds its breath. A bag, a dog, and a promise too strong to let go. Let me tell you what really happened. The puppy wasn't much to look at in the beginning, mud-caked paws, ribs just visible beneath a dull yellow coat, eyes wide and waiting. George Greaves spotted him first, nestled among river reeds on a misty morning walk. The old man had gone fishing, but when he returned hours later, he carried no trout, just a pup swaddled in a flannel shirt and the quiet kind of hope that grows with every small heartbeat. Nina didn't question it. She had always trusted George's instincts, especially about strays. They named him Buddy before the kettle had even boiled, and by the week's end, he'd memorized the corners of the kitchen floor where sunlight fell in the afternoons. He wasn't loud, didn't bark often, and scarcely ever begged. Just watched, listened, and followed the rhythm of the house like he'd always known it. George built a small gate at the edge of their yard along Elm Street, mostly for show, he'd say, knowing full well Buddy could leap over it if ever he wanted to. But Buddy didn't. He sat just behind it, sometimes for hours, ears perked to every shuffle, every hush of breeze that stirred the hedges. He wasn't waiting for anything at first, just watching. But watching became waiting the day the noise came, the steady clomp of polished shoes and the soft click of a brass-tipped gate latch. The first time Buddy saw Harold Johansson, something in the air changed. The mailman walked with purpose, but his eyes always seemed to smile before his mouth did. He wore a brown leather satchel worn to velvet on the edges and walked as though each porch held a secret worth keeping. Buddy didn't bark that day, didn't wag, didn't growl, just stared, Curious, the next morning, the man returned at the same time, steps even whistle breezy. A newspaper under one arm, envelopes cribbed like puzzle pieces in the other. Buddy sat behind the gate again, this time a little straighter. And so it began. By the second week, Buddy shifted at the sound of incoming footsteps, even before George or Nina noticed the time. At first it was just present silent company across a picket fence. But then came the biscuit. It wasn't grand, just a plain treat pulled from the depths of Harold's satchel one early Tuesday. No words were needed. The biscuit came, Buddy waited, and the two shared a moment beneath the gold reach of a rising sun. From then on, Buddy knew he wasn't the type of dog who chased things that weren't his. But the sound of Harold's steps, and later his whistler three-note loop, like wind on glass, drew the Labrador every day from wherever he was. Once, even during a thunderstorm, Buddy arrived, soaked but on time, seated like a statue at the gate. Harold offered him a towel and a grin and slipped the biscuit into his mouth with a chuckle. It wasn't just habit anymore. It was something gentler, like music. Over time, Buddy began to track more than the whistle. He learned the order of the route, knew the sound of the heavy Ford post van, grew familiar with the rising hush of footsteps climbing Mrs. Eldon's creaky steps 5 doors down. He'd lift his head when he heard the gate latch on Pine Street click shut always 3 minutes before Harold arrived. The townsfolk noticed, of course. It was impossible not to. That dog's got a timer in his head, someone said at the salon. Another mused, maybe he's waiting for a letter of his own. But they all said it with affection. You could see it in Buddy's stance. This was no distraction. This was devotion. Every so often, George and Nina tried to guess what tied the dog and the mailman. Must be the biscuits, George would say, scratching his chin. But Nina, with that softness in her voice reserved only for things that truly mattered, would say, it's more than that, George. Some hearts speak quieter, dog hearts, especially. Seasons slipped past like pages fluttering in an open book. Buddy grew from gangly pup to calm shadow. His golden coat thickened, tail still as he waited, like patience made flesh. Sometimes Harold brought more than biscuits. Once a red ball, another time a scarf when the wind bit especially sharp in February. But always there was the ritual. A soft clatter, a whistle, a biscuit, a pause that felt like acknowledgement. Then onward. One morning in late spring, George snapped a photo of the pair. It was a quick moment, Harold tipping his cap, Buddy at the gate, ears tilted forward, the morning sun casting long silhouettes across the gravel. George printed it and framed it above the kitchen sink. For memory, he said, but Buddy didn't need pictures. He had rhythm in his bones, and a gait that meant more now than it ever had. Because for a dog like Buddy, someone who smelled of paper and leather and old peppermint was no longer just part of the routine. He was the routine. Harold Johansson walked like a man with a map in his head, each step certain, each stop expected. He wasn't fast, but he was never late. His brown leather satchel swung at his side like a clock's pendulum, worn and patched from decades of service. Most people in Wilford Hollow didn't know much about Harold's history, but they didn't need to. He was part of the town's rhythm, like the whistle of the train at 3:05 or the church bell every Sunday. He had delivered letters longer than most kids had been alive, worked 6 days a week, took his coffee black, and once told Mrs. Cartwright that a letter was sacred because it meant someone, somewhere, remembered you. That made her cry a little, but Harold just gave her a peppermint from his coat pocket and shuffled on to the next porch. He wore the same cap, everyday navy blue, with a fraying edge and a stitched emblem faded almost to thread. Everyone knew Harold's cap and his smile and the slightly uneven click of his shoes along the pavement. He'd tip that cap to dogs, babies, and grumpy teenagers alike, as if to remind them that kindness didn't cost anything at all. People said Harold had a list in his head: who liked their mail stacked flat, who hated junk flyers, who waited most anxiously for postcards from grandkids gone off to places like Tampa or Cedar Falls. He remembered birthdays without being told twice. And when Mr. Brewster lost his wife, Harold was the only one who left a note tucked between condolence cards. It read, "Still here if you want company." That was Harold. He had a biscuit bag in the deeper pocket of his satchel. That's what most kids called it, though most never saw it with their own eyes. He never made a show of pulling it out, just reached in when the moment arrived, small hand shaped by habit, and placed the treat with care. For golden retrievers, mutts, shepherds, and especially one quiet yellow lab on Elm Street. The first time Harold saw Buddy, he slowed. Just a little, just enough. Something about the way the dog sat like he'd been waiting his whole life to meet him. Harold offered the biscuit on instinct, no big smile or coaxing. Buddy accepted it like ceremony. That was all it took. They never spoke, of course not in words. But morning after morning, they held their meeting across the aging white gate. Harold would give a low whistle, the same 3 soft notes every time. Buddy would rise like a shadow, lifting from the porch floor and be ready. "Good fella," Harold might murmur, slipping the biscuit through the slats. But sometimes he didn't say anything at all. Silence sat easy between them. Some days Harold came a little slower. Rain had started bothering his knees. He wore a brace sometimes, light grey and noisy, but he didn't complain. When snow came in great flour sacks across the town, he trudged through it with the patience of a stone statue come to life. At the gate, Buddy would be wet but waiting. Harold would nod. The ritual never broke. On warmer days, when magnolia scents rolled thick down the street and the shade under the oaks grew generous, Harold lingered. He'd lean against the gate, resting for a breath or two. Buddy would tilt his head thoughtfully, like he understood the weight of years tucked behind a mailbag strap. He started giving Buddy extras biscuits. Yes, always. But once he brought a tennis ball, its fuzz worn thin. Another time, a single leaf, flattened between pages of a newspaper, golden brown and shaped like a teardrop. "Found it on Maple Street," he said simply. Buddy sniffed it once and sat down beside it. Even when Harold strolled deeper into the neighborhood, Buddy would sometimes walk the inside fence line, eyes tracking the movement of the postman's bag through the gaps in the hedge line, not always following, just making sure all was well. People noticed. Kids talked about Harold's dog, Lieutenant. Mr. Kim at the gas station once said, "That dog would carry the bag if he had thumbs." To which Harold replied with a rare chuckle, "Good thing he doesn't. He'd do my job better." The bag itself started to show age. Leather corners, worn pale from years of sun. Some seams grew loose, the canvas fraying, but Harold repaired it, gently waxed it with care, stitched small tears by hand in the evenings. It wasn't just a tool. It was history. That old satchel had carried love notes, lost keys, wedding invitations, and grocery lists misdelivered to the wrong Johnsons. But most important, it had carried trust. And for Buddy, It had come to mean something sacred. By the end of that summer, if Harold arrived 10 minutes late, Buddy would sit closer to the gate, tail twitching once or twice. But he never barked. He only waited. And when that soft clatter of shoes finally came, he would rise. George once asked Harold, half joking, "When are you going to train him to carry the mail with you?" Harold shook his head, lips creased, with smile lines. "He's already doing something harder," he said. "He's teaching me how to be present." You could say theirs wasn't an unusual friendship, if your measure of friendship only counted time or words. But if what mattered was rhythm and ritual and remembering each other without trying, then Buddy and Harold had something holy. They never shared toys or tricks, never chased sticks or snapped photos. What they had was a moment each morning. Each day hung in the air like a keepsake, fragile and unwavering. And that old creaking bag was their bridge, so it went. The man with his hat and his stride, the dog with his patience and his gaze, biscuit, whistle, pause. Their mornings passed like quiet prayers, steady and sweet, carried in the hush before the world fully woke up. Everything about them said, "I see you, you matter. Let's do this again tomorrow." By early June, the days in Wilford Hollow swelled with warmth, the kind that wrapped around the porches like a soft quilt, thick with the scent of honeysuckle and the hum of cicadas. School was out. Gardens nodded heavy with tomatoes. And every morning, without fail, Buddy sat behind the white gate, eyes trained down the street, waiting for the gentle rhythm of polished shoes. Harold Johansson didn't need to check his watch. He never did. But if he had, he'd find at most. Mornings Buddy was there 2 minutes and 17 seconds before him. The whistle came first, the 3-note song that rose and fell like an old tune remembered from childhood. Then the gate creaked open with the familiar press of Harold's hand, and out came the biscuit. Always a biscuit dot. Sometimes Harold spoke, "Hot one today, huh?" Or, "That sky's thinking about rain." But often he didn't. The ritual was enough. Wilford Hollow took notice. As small towns do, it held tight to the sweetness of daily things. At the corner diner, folks asked, Buddy still keeping watch? And Lydia from the pharmacy would nod, adding, "More punctual than the bus." It became something people smiled about without realizing it a shared comfort. On Thursdays, Buddy began following Harold along the garden fence, not out of the yard. Just from inside, stepping quietly, matching pace with the mailman as he moved. He'd stop at each pause, sit and wait, as if supervising the delivery. It was never disruptive, just presence. Then one day, Harold paused longer than usual at the gate. He looked down at Buddy, then over at George and Nina, who were weeding the front flower bed. "Mind if I borrow him?" he asked, already unlooping the gate latch. George chuckled. "If he'll go with you, he's yours." The walk was short, just 3 houses up and back. But it was enough. Buddy stayed close to Harold's side, his tail a gentle pendulum, eyes scanning ahead like a quiet guardian. And when they reached home again, Buddy didn't head for water or shade. He sat right down, looked up, and waited for the biscuit, of course, but also for something deeper. A nod, a pause. Recognition. After that, it started happening more often. Every few days, Harold would unhook the latch, tip his cap to Nina, and Buddy would fall into step beside him like it had always been that way. They rarely stayed out long. Children on skateboards waved. Old folks called out from porch swings. More than one neighbor clutched their chest in mock surprise and said, "Look at that dog's training the mailman now." No one laughed harder than Harold. Sometimes Harold talked to Buddy during those walks. Quiet things, half muttered. "Marion would have loved you," he said once. Another time, "Think I missed breakfast again." Buddy never answered, of course. But he watched. And he listened. And when Harold fell silent for stretches, Buddy would nudge his shin gently with his nose, like saying, "Still here." The bag became more than just a delivery pouch in those moments. It hung from Harold's shoulder like a familiar burden, flapping, soft against his hip, ragged at the edges. It carried mail, yes, but also treats, tissues, cough drops, and little notes folded 4 times over. And now quiet comfort in each squeak of its leather strap, each shift of weight. Some said Buddy looked proud when he walked beside it, like he understood what that bag meant at home. Buddy's behavior changed in small but noticeable ways. When it was time for Harold's usual visit, he'd rise from sleep before his body even fully woke. At night, he sometimes stood briefly at the door before curling in again, as though instinct was measuring time. George joked about setting his own watch by the dog. But Nina never joked. She just smiled, soft and far away. Once, during a summer rain, Harold didn't unlatch the gate. "Too muddy," he said. "Too many puddles." So he stood by the mailbox and pulled a biscuit from the bag. Buddy received it from a distance, then barked once, his first bark in weeks. Just one, clear. Then sat down again, tail brushing against damp concrete, content but steady. "You miss those walks too, huh?" Harold asked. Buddy blinked, head tilting just so. That weekend, George and Nina hosted a neighborhood yard sale. Tables lined the driveway. Kids darted between folding racks of paperbacks and jigsaw puzzles. Harold stopped by on his off day, capless and in a neatly pressed shirt. He brought Buddy a new leather collar, deep brown with a small brass ring. "He earned it," Harold said simply, fastening it with gentle hands. The collar caught the sun later that week when Buddy walked 2 blocks with Harold during a gentle breeze, the morning alive with birdsong. A woman trimming roses looked up and whispered to her husband. It's like watching a painting move. Each routine settled deeper into memory. The sound of Harold's bag buckle, the soft pad of Buddy's feet beside his polished shoes. Even the silences grew familiar, like the pauses in a favorite song. One Friday, near the end of summer, Buddy reached the gate early, much earlier than usual. The street was still waking up. Milk still frosted the bottle left on Miss Tilda's porch. The sky above was streaked orange and blue. But Buddy sat, eyes on the road, certain dot, and when Harold arrived, a full 5 minutes before his route began, he knelt beside the gate, one palm on Buddy's head. "Thought you'd be here," he said. He didn't have a biscuit that morning. He had a slice of apple wrapped in wax paper. Buddy took it gently, then stayed at the gate anyway, watching until Harold disappeared around the bend. That afternoon, a postcard arrived at Nina and George's address in Harold's careful print. It read, "He's more than a dog. But you already knew that." "So do I," signed simply. H. The bag, worn thin in places, swung lighter that day down Elm Street. Not because it carried less, but because of who waited along the way. The Tuesday it happened, the morning was quiet in an unusual way. No breeze, no birdsong, only the hush of dew still clinging to the grass and the faint creak of the back porch settling in the early sun. Buddy sat by the gate, as always, posture straighter than usual, alert. He tilted his head once toward the breeze but didn't move. The hour passed like syrup, slow and sure. Then came the unfamiliar silence. No clatter of shoes, no whistle, just the steady tick of time stretching longer than it should have. Nina noticed first. She stepped out with coffee in hand, expecting to see Harold's usual procession. The cap, the bag, the biscuit. But there was only Buddy, unmoving. Eyes fixed down the street like he could conjure the man out of thin air. Another hour, a breeze stirred. Still nothing. George poked his head out the screen door. Mailman running late. Nina only shrugged, watching Buddy, very late. By noon, a new sound came, the engine of a different kind of mail trucker. Younger man in a crisp uniform Buddy didn't recognize. No whistle, no familiar gait. Just footsteps, too quick. Letters handed over with a nod and a polite afternoon. Buddy didn't move toward him, didn't even twitch his tail. He only flicked his ears once, then returned his eyes to the road. That evening, the front porch smelled of cut grass and unanswered questions. George sat with a newspaper folded on his lap, but he didn't read. Nina knitted with needles barely moving, and Buddy, still by the gate, waited as the sky turned tangerine and lilac. Maybe he's taking a vacation, George offered half-heartedly. Maybe. Nina replied, but a tone said otherwise. Buddy stayed out later than usual that night. When Nina called him, he rose slowly, gave one final glance down the road, and padded inside without protest. Not defeated, just ... uncertain ... the next morning. Buddy took his place again. 10 minutes earlier than usual. Upright, still waiting, but the same young man came. Sunglasses, earbuds, a hurried path, no biscuit. Buddy didn't acknowledge him. To the Labrador, the man was as empty as the envelope he delivered. By the third morning, Wilford Hollow had begun to murmur. Stories floated in the bakery and over the gas pump aisles. Anyone seen Harold? He didn't stop by on Saturday like he always does. He missed his Tuesday coffee at Grover's. Each voice softer than the last. Some said he had the flu. Others whispered about retirement. A few exchanged looks that said nothing but meant something more. Buddy waited each day just the same. Rain fell on Thursday morning, a soft, steady drizzle. That darkened the porch steps and made the roses press low under the weight. Nina thought Buddy might stay inside, but he didn't. He waited, raindrops clinging to his fur, unmoving except for the rise and fall of his breath. The routine had cracked subtly and terribly. George tried once to distract him with a remnant of breakfast sausage wrapped in a bit of napkin. Buddy accepted it, but without joy. Without that tail-twitching gratitude he usually gave. Nina found herself watching from the front window more than usual. Not at the road, really. At Buddy, and at the space beside him that once held footsteps and quiet conversation. A letter came Friday with no return address, no handwriting, either just type. Mail rerouted. New carrier assigned. Route adjustment temporary. No word of Harold. Buddy sniffed the air as though he could still locate him. In the wind that weekend, Nina opened the cedar chest at the foot of the guest bed and pulled out an old dog blanket from last winter. She spread it by the door in case Buddy wanted to come in from the porch sooner. At first, he didn't, but eventually the wind grew sharp and the sky hinted at storm. Buddy came inside just before nightfall, dragging a single leaf stuck to his back paw. He sat down on the blanket and sighed, not like a person does in sadness, but like a dog does when he realizes something important is missing. The townspeople stopped speculating aloud after that. It became one of those things you asked about only if your heart was ready. Maybe he'd send a letter. Maybe he wouldn't. But Buddy didn't wait for news. He waited for presents. Every morning, same gate, same ritual without the man who gave meaning to it. One child walking with her father whispered, "Why's the dog so still every day?" Her father knelt beside her. "He's waiting for a friend." Did the friend go away? The man looked at Buddy, then back at his daughter. Not really, not to him. And still, each morning, Buddy returned. Each afternoon, he stayed. Each evening, he searched the air for a scent only he could recognize. It was harder in the quiet hours. Around dusk, when porch lights blinked on and wind chimes stirred drowsily, hermit thrushes singing soft into the branches. That was when Buddy's posture would shift, when hope leaned too hard against empty expectation. He never howled, never barked, never scratched at the earth, just waited. Waited for the three-note whistle, waited for the soft creak of a familiar stride, waited, because that is what loyalty looks like, when it has no ending to turn toward. And on the worn brick porch of the White House on Elm Street, that waiting became the town's new ritual, even if no one said it aloud. Because sometimes you don't need to say anything. Sometimes your presence becomes the letter that never comes. And someone like Buddy, he reads every silence like it's already written down. The bag came back on a Thursday late in the day, when the shadows were starting to stretch long across the sidewalks and the trees rustled with the sound of changing weather. The air held that curious weight, like it was waiting for something. Buddy lay on the porch, just like he had every day since the silence began. His head rested on his front paws. His ears perked faintly when a branch cracked in the distance. Another car passed, and he didn't move until footsteps, soft, unfamiliar, but careful, touched the walk. They belonged to a young woman, maybe late 20s, hair tied up in a striped scarf that trailed down one shoulder. She wore boots that scuffed slightly with every step and paused at the end of the walkway as if unsure whether to come any closer. In her hands, a bag. Not just any bag. The bag, faded leather, tarnished brass, a patch over one corner made of blue denim already fading. At the seams, there was no mistaking it. Harold's mailbag. Buddy's eyes widened, not in alarm, but in something older, deeper. Recognition. He didn't bark. He simply rose. The woman stepped forward slowly, the bag cradled against her chest. "Hi," she said softly, and then again, in case it hadn't been heard, "Hi, Buddy." He tilted his head. Just so. The way he used to when Harold would say something peculiar, like name in the wind. The woman knelt. Her voice was steadier now. "My name's Sophie. I'm Harold's granddaughter." She let those words sit in the air for a moment, then rested the bag gently on the porch beside Buddy. "He talked about you almost every time I saw him. Called you his porch partner. Said you waited better than most people he ever knew." Buddy took 2 steps closer. No tail twitch, no sound, just breath, slow and warm. Sophie's lip trembled, but she kept talking. "He got sick. It was faster than we expected. 1 minute, he was smiling about peaches being back in season, and the next, her voice caught. She shook her head, looked away, composed herself. She paused. Before he passed, he told me something odd. That if anything ever happened, I should bring this bag back to you." Sophie gave a small laugh. I didn't really understand what it meant, but I do now. Buddy lowered his head. Not in fear, not in confusion, like a bow. like a memory bending back toward something sacred. "I'm the new mail carrier now," she added after a pause. "They offered me the route. I didn't know if I wanted to take it. But then Mum showed me the photo Harold kept in his wallet." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a weather-worn photo Harold tipping his cap. Buddy behind the gate, golden outlined in morning sun. Sophie smiled, blinking fast. "I think he knew I'd say yes." Her hand hovered halfway back to the bag. "I wasn't sure if I should leave this, but it's yours now." I think he meant that. Buddy stepped forward fully. He sniffed the side of the bag, slow and careful. Then the strap, then the brass buckle. And finally, he lay down beside it and closed his eyes. Not deeply asleep, not exhausted, just ... still. Like something inside him had moved, but didn't need to be explained. Sophie watched him for a long moment, then stood. "It's supposed to rain tonight," she said almost to herself. But Buddy didn't move. He didn't twitch or shift. Sophie hesitated at the bottom step, then returned to the porch, unlatching the storm door and slipping inside just long enough to return with the old dog blanket from last winter. She unfolded it gently beside the bag and gave the softest pat to Buddy's head before placing the fabric at his side. He stayed still, watching, but not waiting. After she left, the wind picked up. The light changed. And for the first time in a long time, Buddy did not rise at sunset for one last check of the fading road. Instead, he settled beside the bag, tucking himself close to its side and breathing quietly into the soft creases of its folds. That night, the porch light flickered on as if by memory, catching the shape of the Labrador curled around the satchel in a pool of warm gold. Inside the house, Nina whispered to George, "He knows. Somehow, he knows." And George, who had always trusted dogs a little more than most people, gave a quiet nod. He always did. Outside, rain began to fall, not hard, just a hush against the roof, and Buddy didn't stir at the sound. The leather of the bag gleamed damp in places, but Buddy's body shielded most of it, like something he'd done 1,000 times before. In silent thanks, in quiet duty, the wind tugged at the edge of the blanket. The rain kept falling, but on that porch, beside that faithful bag, one old friend rested for the first time in days, not because he was tired, but because some part of waiting had come to an end, and some part of love wordless and whole had returned in a new shape. That evening, as the street grew dark and lamplight painted soft halos above every gatepost and porch swing, nobody in Wilford Hollow spoke about the faded leather bag, but many paused in their routines, just a second to glance toward Elm Street, and though they saw nothing but a quiet porch and a yellow dog lying still, they felt something that stayed with them long after the lights were out. Some kind of promise, some kind of peace, and they knew the bag had come home. The mornings in Wilford Hollow changed after that. Thursday, nothing huge, just ... gentler. Sophie started walking the route each day with Harold's bag slung across her shoulder. She had other gear, of course, modern pouches, waterproof folders, but she carried the old satchel anyway, said it gave her balance, familiar weight. Buddy didn't wait by the gate anymore. Instead, after breakfast, he'd linger near the porch steps until Sophie rounded the corner. Then, calmly and without announcement, he would fall into step behind her. Not every day, but most. Neighbors began to notice, in that quiet way small towns do, heads gently tilted behind curtains, a smile pressed into a mug at the window. No one said much, because there was something almost sacred about it. Unspoken, like walking with memory. Sophie didn't make a big deal out of it either. She never called for Buddy, didn't ask him to follow, but each time he appeared beside her, curled in a half smile, paws steady and clean, she seemed to walk a little lighter. There was no whistle now, but Buddy didn't need it. He walked 3 houses, sometimes 5, occasionally all the way down Pine Street before making the quiet trek back to the Greaves' porch. Nina would always have a small dish of water waiting, sometimes a biscuit, even. George stopped trying to guess how the dog knew Sophie's route. Same way he always did, he muttered once, with his heart. Sophie settled into the rhythm steadily. Her voice was softer than Harold's, but her presence echoed the same warmth. She remembered names, took mental notes, carried extras. In her satchel a cough drop here, a birthday card there. Miss Tilda's peaches, wrapped in a napkin, still made it to her door each week, and when she stopped at certain gates, Buddy would sit just a bit taller, like he knew which steps had meant more to Harold, especially the Brewster house. Sophie hadn't needed to knock. Mr. Brewster had already been waiting, porch light on, even in the afternoon, kettle just boiled. When he saw Buddy trot up beside her, his eyes rimmed with quiet tears. "Still got him walking rounds, huh?" he asked. Sophie smiled. "He seems to like it. Guess I would too. ... If I got to walk with ghosts that loved me." Buddy didn't react, just sat, still, present. And when Sophie handed over a small envelope marked "Welcome back," Mr. Brewster laughed. That fool always did believe mail could fix the heart. Sundays were different. There was no mail, no route, no satchel, but Buddy sometimes chose to sit by the bag anyway. It had a new place now, soft patch just beside the porch bench. Under the hanging fern Harold used to fuss over, Sophie had dusted the leather the day she brought it back. Nina had resewn a small seam. It looked almost like it once did, framed in memory. Sometimes, on Sunday mornings, Buddy would rest beside it for hours. No one disturbed him. Children passing by would hush without being asked. Couples walking dogs of their own would pause there, chatter at the edge of Elm Street. Even dogs seemed to slow their pace near the Greaves' house, as if they understood the weight of history. Every now and then, Sophie would stop by when her route was done and sit beside the bag herself. She didn't always talk to Buddy or to anyone, but she'd rub the edge of the satchel absent-mindedly, the way Harold once did when listening closely to stories at the corner diner. In those moments, Buddy would lay his head on her boot and close his eyes, not out of fatigue, out of comfort, the kind that settles when you know someone understands a language without needing to speak it. In early autumn, on a morning crisp with leaf scent and the tail end of summer's warmth, Buddy led Sophie through the entire neighborhood, one full route start to finish, no pauses, no hesitation, like he was passing something on. "Not bad," Sophie whispered as they returned to the porch. "You think I'm ready?" Buddy didn't answer, of course, just gave a slow blink and curled beside the bag, tail pressed gently to its side. Later that week, a letter arrived at the Greaves' house. No stamp, hand-dash delivered. It was a drawing. Crayon lines, a sketch by a child who'd glimpsed the quiet miracle of Elm Street, a yellow dog, a brown satchel, and a girl with kind eyes walking through the gold of turning trees. George held it up to the light and smiled. "Wish Harold could have seen this," Nina replied softly. "I think he did. Routine is fragile. It can break without warning. but it can also rebuild. Sophie carried letters. Buddy carried presents, and the bag together with its memories remained right where it belonged. Not on a hook in a museum, not stored in a closet, but beside a heart that still beat for all it once held. Each morning the mail moved, the sun rose, the bag swayed, and where it once delivered messages across town lines and state borders, now it delivered something harder to define. A feeling, a connection, a reason to walk and wait and remember. The bag never moved from its spot, not in all the days since it had returned, not more than a few inches this way or that, nudged gently by wind or paw. It sat just beyond the porch railing, beside the planter blooming deep gold, the petals curling like quiet laughter. Now and then, a front step breeze caught the scent of old leather and dust, and Nina would say it still smelled like Harold-like peppermint, pencil shavings, and patient mornings. Buddy lay near it most days, sometimes with his head resting on the canvas, sometimes with a paw brushing the brass buckle as if he needed to remind the world this was his place, his part of the story. People passed the house a little slower now, not because they were curious. Curiosity faded weeks ago, because reverence tends to bloom in still places. Children no longer pointed. They just looked, maybe wondered, maybe understood in their own way. Someone left a note once, tucked beneath the planter, folded into 4 even squares. Just 2 words, drawn in pencil. Thank you. George found it the next morning, showed it to Nina, who read it twice, then placed it inside the old wooden recipe box in the kitchen drawer. "We'll keep it," she said. "It feels right." Every few days, Sophie would still sit beside the bag after her last delivery. She didn't always stay long, a minute, sometimes 2. Just enough to smooth the edge of the saddle-stitched seam, or place her hand on Buddy's back, or look out across Elm Street the way Harold used to. Nothing extraordinary happened while she sat there. Birds chirped, cars passed, the world turned on. But for those moments, a quiet kind of magic clung to the porch boards like dew. Once Sophie whispered, "If you ever come back, I'll let you walk ahead this time." She let out a short laugh, like she didn't mean it to escape. "You've earned it." Buddy looked up at her and blinked once slow, the type of blink that says, "Already did." On winter mornings, when frost kissed the porch steps and George's breath showed in puffs, Buddy's routine never faltered. He'd push the front door open just wide enough to slip out, trot to his place beside the bag, and sit. Sometimes he stayed for 10 minutes, sometimes until dusk, sometimes when the wind bit harder, Nina would nudge open the storm door and toss out a blanket, folded small beside him in case he wanted it. He didn't always use it, but he always sniffed it first, like noticing mattered more than comfort. Sophie said once, "I think he knows this is where memory lives now." George said, "I think he's the one tending it." The bag had a different weight to it then. Not the burden of letters or parcels, but the shape of time, loss, gratitude. It stopped being a thing used, and became fully a thing known. Every scuff on the leather whispered a story. Every stitch held a name. Once in early spring, after the frost had melted and crocus petals began daring the earth to open, Buddy woke before sunrise. He didn't bark or whine, just got up and stood beside the bag longer than usual. Long enough for Sophie to catch sight of him during her route prep at the corner hydrant. She paused and stared. No one said anything that day. But when she walked her rounds, she whistled not Harold's tune, not exactly, but something close. 3 soft notes, not perfect, but familiar. Buddy heard. He didn't rise, but his tail moved once. Then again later that evening, George asked Nina if she'd ever thought dogs might understand more than people gave them credit for. Nina just pressed a hand to his and said, "It's not understanding, it's remembering." In April, a new child moved onto Elm Street. 5 years old, carried a red lunchbox and an imagination loud enough to reach the sky. She asked Sophie one morning, "Is that your dog?" "No," Sophie replied, smiling. "He's everyone's. Can I pet him if he lets you?" The child approached Buddy, slow and respectful the way children somehow just know to do. Buddy lifted his head, stared at her for a breath or two, then nudged forward. She giggled. Sophie watched them for a moment, then continued up the street. Later, she found a crayon drawing folded inside her mailbag. A yellow dog, a brown satchel, and tiny stars drawn like freckles around them both. When she showed it to George, he didn't say a word, just tucked it into the wooden recipe box beside the pencil-written "Thank you." Years later, that box would hold dozens more flattened dandelions, once even a dog tag engraved with walking memories. But the bag itself never held anything again. No letters, no envelopes, only dust and sunlight, and one dog who refused to let it be forgotten. One evening, some said you could almost hear Harold's whistle drifting low through the trees above Elm Knowe. One claimed to have seen him, but 5 porches down. 2 wind chimes moved in perfect unison, though the air was still. Buddy lifted his head. No excitement, just attention. Like he heard something others didn't, something he'd heard before. And when Sophie arrived that afternoon, he followed her without pause, quiet, certain, like he'd never stopped.